Welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck podcast. Today is Wednesday, January 15th, 2025. Joining me for today's podcast are Stuart Walprin, who scribes for Popular Mechanics, AARP, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other fine publications. Rob Pecoraro, who writes about tech developments at PC Mag, Fast Company, and other publications as well. And good old John Quain, who writes for the New York Times, Smart Cities, and Tom's Guide. Gentlemen, did you survive CES? That's my big question. Stuart, I know you didn't go. You're a lucky man. But let me ask my Rob and John friends here. Did you? Oh, there he's got his pass right there. So, Rob, what did you get? Did you get the CES disease like I did? I did. I'm just getting over it.
I did not. No, I'd like to think that after this is my 27th year of attending it, I should have developed immunity to pretty much most of the communicable diseases known to man.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, just dead tired when I landed on my red eye at Dulles Airport on Friday morning. But I expected that.
Well, you know what the mistake that I made, and you think I've been doing this for, like, this was show 31 or 32 for me, is that all the big companies like Lenovo, for example, and I probably shouldn't call them out specifically because they did a great job. They booked the entire restaurant, like in the Venetian. They had the Miko's, the Greek restaurant, and it's actually very convenient. They have a bunch of demos. They have finger foods, but that's the problem. They're serving food, and then you're touching the keyboard that's been touched by 27,000 other people, and you're not even thinking about it because there's also alcohol.
You ate the shrimp, didn't you?
Yeah. So you avoid. I'm going to wear gloves next time, like those.
Don't eat the shrimp. Do not eat the shrimp. That's the thing. I got through it fine, knock on wood, and I had to go straight to New York to another conference, philosophy conference that was sort of like nonstop as well. So I had two back-to-back.
I was saying, I was at this hacker conference. 9 hours of landing, I was on my way into DC for ShmooCon.
Yeah,
last year ever.
Yeah, so it's but take your vitamins. Wore a mask on the plane. There were a lot of people that were pretty sick on the plane, so that I believe that kind of helped. So, just advice if you're out doing the trade show circuit right now. But yeah, it was an interesting show. Sorry, Stuart wasn't there. Rob and I took the bus. Public transportation in Las Vegas starting to work out. So.
Well, you know what's shocking, and Stuart, you'd be interested in this factoid. They always report the attendance at the last day of the show, and the number that's now they're publicly communicating is 141,000. And I was actually surprised at that because that's a pretty big number. I mean, it's I think that the highest number they had was 150,000 before.
No, I think they actually had 175,000 one.
175. Okay, yeah. So, but 141 is a respectable full number. I didn't feel 140. Did you feel?
I did. Would you like?
Did you?
Yeah, it took almost an hour for the bus to get from the LVCC to the Venetian. I should have walked.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. It took, I felt like there was at least that many people there. It was pretty jammed in the halls. But I skipped out early too. So I got
out. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I did one thing successfully this year that I will replicate is when people reach out to me, I tell people, okay, on day Tuesday, I'm at the Venetian. If you're in the hotel or if you're that's easy because you can walk back and forth between the expo and within 7 minutes. The killer is when you've got to meet at the convention center. That's the kiss of death, and you easily got to pad a half an hour before and a half an hour after. So I think I've figured out a way there. But let's get into what kind of the things we saw here. So let me bring up the slides. Now, John, I'm going to start with you. From a best of CES standpoint, some of the things that jumped at you, there was a list of categories that you threw at me, but I'll turn it over to you for a couple of minutes.
Sure. I just wrote about this for on the road to autonomy.com, and that's just to plug the website. So sort of my roundup of autonomous things. Actually, I wasn't expecting a lot. Rob's going to talk about one particular experience in a few minutes, but I wasn't expecting a lot from the show, to be quite honest. But in this odd category of robovacs, like robotic vacuums that have been around for 20 years now, They're really starting to take off. And the one that really garnered a lot of attention, for example, was Roborock has a new machine, the Saros Z70. It's going to come out this year. It's not like a maybe, proof of concept, that has a robotic arm that lifts out of it and comes out and picks up like your socks or stuff in the way of the robotic vacuum. Now it sounds like, okay, cool, but kind of silly. But you start thinking about the possibilities, and then you start to see where this stuff is going.
Yeah,
And
all the way to terrify your cat.
yeah, terrify your cat, keep it from riding the vacuum, but also, pick up other objects, etc. So that garnered a lot of attention, and the competition, of course, saw this and went, oh, me too, me too, and very quickly, Dream, another RoboVac maker, they make some other machines as well, put out a prototype on the showroom floor right across from the RoboRock one, saying, "Oh, we're going to have one too." Now that was just a mock-up; it was just proof of concept. But the idea is there. I bet you'll see a lot of things like that coming. You think about things like putting little steps in these that they can go up some of the steps and climb stairs, pick up larger objects, use tools to scrub things is another idea that they're going to use for these robotic arms. Put cameras on them as well. So a lot of interesting stuff is going to come out of there. And remember, these are all autonomous vehicles. Essentially, they're navigating around your home all by themselves already. So some interesting progress there in a category I just didn't think was that exciting. If you asked me a couple of years ago, I was like, whatever. Vacuum. Yeah.
John, did you see anything specific to, because the one usage model with RoboVax that I would kill to have, and it has to be a combo product. I'm not interested in two different robot vacuums, but one that really does a good job of mopping.
Yeah.
There have been solutions on the market, but even the mopping is not as great as it should be. And combining a spray and dusting can be really messy. Did you see anything there that jumped at you?
There was nothing really new in the mopping part, except some are really focusing on cleaning the pads in the station so that, they can come back, they sense, and they clean the pads off, and then they go back out again, which if you're mopping yourself is a pain in the neck to do. I hate the bucket and like one of those ads from the 80s, scrubbing and scrubbing. I actually think they work pretty well. The Narwhal, the RoboVac, the Eufy one all seem to work pretty well in the high-end mopping combination vacuums. Now, it takes a couple of passes. Having done it in my house many times, you don't expect it to be perfect the first time, but after a couple of passes, it pretty much gets everything. It's great. Going under the bed, awesome. Not having to do that is a great chance. So yeah, they've made a lot of progress. But the other autonomous thing that's really making progress that you don't see, it's not on a public road, are these heavy equipment that's out there in mining operations and the agribusiness. We're turning those into autonomous vehicles. A lot of headway being made there, which is why John Deere from the last several years has been at the show. So is Caterpillar in the West Hall, these gigantic machines. Everybody loves climbing on them. We're like little kids. Hey, let's go up in the cab, But they're making great headway, including John Deere has new two tractors that can do these high value, what they call high value crops, which are like orchards, where it usually takes a lot of manual labor to deal with them. Pulling anything off them is kind of tricky as well, not to ruin the crop. They've got a new autonomous tractor system that they're going to use at least in almond farms that goes down the row and navigates down the rows and everything. Which is pretty remarkable. And that's like a practical, real use for autonomous vehicles right now. So I thought that was pretty impressive.
Right. Rob, what about you?
So I want to talk about a different kind of autonomous vehicle, the Zoox robotaxi. It's an
we're going to talk about this. Wait, I have a slide on that. So
okay, right. Sorry.
Other than that,
so then I'm going to talk about AI and everything, whether or not you want it. And yeah, so let's talk about the Delta keynote. Did any of y'all see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, it's a Sphere. I'd never been to anything there before. Very cool use of the multimedia effects, which include Smell-o-vision, I kid you not.
Yes. Yes.
But the sort of centerpiece of their announcement was this Delta Concierge, which they're saying will use AI to streamline your journey. But it's talking about things like telling you where to go through security and reminding that you can use the lounge and checking that your passport is current. And that sounds more like software to me, which is so much of that stuff. Samsung was talking about here's what's going to make 8K TVs relevant. Finally, using AI to upscale video. What exactly is the difference between that and what you had last year or 2 years ago? I think it's all still software.
Hmm.
And it's just this trend going on and on for everything. And when everything's AI, nothing is. That's my thesis. And I don't think this is a productive.
But I was impressed though. I went to the LG keynote and the Samsung keynote, and even LG, which is not a company that's completely synonymous with AI. Obviously, they're getting on the AI bandwagon for integration to their appliances and to their making life a lot easier. But the phrase they're trying to coin is affectionate intelligence.
Yeah. How about we not?
Being an old marketing guy, I kind of like that because it's a bit Apple-esque in that they're trying to defang some of the negative perceptions that AI has. And and there were some usage models that they demonstrated that were kind of pretty cool. There was one that was kind of creepy.
The Huron
That
assistant.
their vision of AI would it knows what the weather is, and it would recommend what clothes you should wear
Knows your
based
mom has a
on.
doctor's appointment. That was
Yeah, exactly.
laying it on a little thick.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but I thought that was interesting. And of course, Copilot PCs were everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the point where, and I'm still not convinced that. And I want to get Stuart to chime in on this. Just because there are AI PCs out there, and this is one of these chicken and egg things. The market is growing. I mean, there was some good numbers reported yesterday by one of the market research firms in terms of the overall share of the market from a PC standpoint. It looks like it grew year over year, which is a good thing. But a lot of people are attributing it. Oh well, it's AI. AI are forcing upgrades, and the problem with that is that since every PC now on the market is a Copilot PC, whether it's a Snapdragon based PC or an Intel based PC, they're all on the Microsoft Copilot category. That you're not necessarily upgrading because it's a Copilot PC. You're upgrading because that's the only thing that you can buy. I mean, that's just So I get a little, I'm a little disjointed on that. I do think it's helping, but I don't think AI is a pure reason why people are upgrading their PCs. And let me ask Stuart for his opinion on that.
Well, it's funny. Watching the show from afar, it seemed like every press release and every story I saw had AI in it someplace. The second Rob's observation. And it reminded me of about 30 years ago when CES was filled with HD this and HD that and HD the other thing and HD ready and it seemed the phrase AI was just applied to everything without regard for what AI actually meant. So, but one of the conferences, in fact, it's funny, during the show, Apple released its Image Playground in beta form, which I thought was very interesting. And I tried playing with it, and I still haven't come up with a viable image yet. I tried to put myself in the Beatles, for instance, and it failed miserably in creating anything that looked like me as John Lennon. But one of the conferences I covered was an AI is Here conference that was essentially just Meta chief scientist Jan LeCun, who I'm assuming John knows of. And he talked about the fact that AI was about as smart as a cat was where the physical environment is concerned. And he's developing something at Meta called a platform or a model called JEPA, JEPA, which is Joint Embedding Predictive Architecture, which he believes is going to develop within about 5 years into giving AI common sense and predicts that in about 10 to 15 years, all of us will be wandering around with our own set of AI agents, sort of like a big shot executive being followed by a whole bunch of executive assistants. and he was really downplaying the potential of the existing large language model um, architectures,
Right.
and saying that they were not really designed to produce any kind of common sense or to recognize the physical environment in a way. And I just saw on Blue Sky today, somebody did a video of Tesla's vision where it was showing in real life a train going across a train crossing, but the Tesla vision kept seeing it as a series of cars and trucks
I
instead of a
saw that.
train. So LeCune's view of AI, I think, is much different than what everybody else seems to be thinking of AI as. And I thought that was the most interesting thing that in terms of what the future will bring that I saw coming out of the show.
Yeah, I think that's the next iteration is really what in Silicon Valley parlance. I think the AI, the generative AI, the large language models, dead end, already at that dead end. We're using maximum computing capacity, and it's getting dumber instead of smarter. So, to your point, yes, several of these people in AI are talking exactly about what Stuart's talking about in terms of having the system understand what it's like to live in a physical environment. If you
Right.
can do that, then you've got something at the start of something really interesting. Interestingly enough, the last item on our slide there is a big company that really didn't say anything about AI because it's not really relevant right now. Yes, you can apply it to make funny answers on Google. That's helpful, but maybe not. Um, Toyota, 5 years ago at CES, they announced that they were going to do this experimental village, this town, and build it from scratch. Woven city is what they called it because it weaves together all aspects of life. That's the metaphor that's going on in there, in case you're wondering why they were calling it that. And they had this image of it because they had this area in the shadow of Mount Fuji, which is awfully picturesque and like looks perfect. 5 years later, they came back to CES to announce, yes, they had completed the first phase. They have built one whole section of this town or village. You're going to have the first 100 people residing in it very soon in the next couple of months, mostly Toyota employees. But the whole idea is they're going to try all sorts of different technologies, from infrastructure underneath the city to autonomous vehicles. Of course, what interests me, these pallet delivery systems, sustainability, sustainable foods, hydrogen fuel sources to see if those work, a lot of different technologies, and then see in the real world what the people that live there actually interact with and what they think of it. It's a fascinating experiment,
Yeah.
and no one has tried something this size before. And
Didn't Panasonic announce something that they were doing something similar to this a couple of years ago at IFA?
Panasonic has talked about using technologies in existing places. Like, I think, Stuart, you and I have seen it in Japan, where many
Right.
years ago, more than a decade ago, they have those batteries that sit outside of homes and trickle charge, and then can act as a backup way before Elon Musk ever thought of solar power or anything. And they've been doing that for a long time, but they didn't have a dedicated. They have like their campuses where they were doing this.
Mm-hmm.
This is building a little town.
When do we get to visit the
It's
Toyota
pretty
biosphere?
wild.
That's what I want to know.
Pardon me?
When do we get to visit this Toyota biosphere?
Right. So the very first thing I was thinking of, I was looking at going, I don't speak Japanese. How am I ever going to get there?
That's right to start.
But it could be very interesting, and a variety of demographics too. Retirees. So there are mobility issues, of course, with people who are older, youngsters and students. And there's this youngish guy that's sort of in charge of it at Toyota. And when we asked him, what about some other aspects of it? And he said, well, we're not going to bring too many people yet because there's no entertainment. Like, there's nothing. They haven't built the movie theater or the bowling alley or whatever in the village yet. So they're like, it'll be a while before we have the 2,000 plus people, but it's fascinating idea. It'll be interesting to see what happens. They're going to bring in scholars and researchers so you could try out your idea there. And I'll be interesting to see what bombs, what people just hate.
Well, I got to bring up this Zoox robotaxi because I did see some of them, roving around, and I said to myself, I bet Rob Pecoraro was going to take a ride in one. If I had to bet on one person on top of the list. So, Rob, what was your experience?
So yeah, Zoox said, would you like to have a ride in a robotaxi? I said, hell yes. When? And it turned out Sunday afternoon worked very well. So it was literally my first stop after dropping off my bags at the hotel. So the taxi itself is neat. It's not a converted car. It doesn't look like anything else on the road. It's this little pod of a vehicle with the wheels pushed out of the corners. Technically, there is no front or back. There's an electric motor above each axle. The lights on each end can change colors as needed. There's no steering wheel. There's just seats for two people on each side. You stare at each other. And yeah, we took a ride in this thing. It was about 40 minutes from the Zoox facility, which is about let's say 4 miles or so southwest of the strip, through a bunch of roads, past Allegiant Stadium, not on I-15. They're not doing highways yet. Just through traffic on the strip itself. Overall, it was very smooth. It did politely break for the one pedestrian we saw. Vegas, not exactly a in New York in pedestrian friendliness. It got confused by traffic cones. If there were any that were just a little bit in the lane, it would get a little skittish, like, I don't know what's going on here. And at one point, there were 2 rows of traffic cones. I don't know why. Vegas is like the world capital of traffic cones because it's never not been under reconstruction in like the 28 years I've been going to it. And it just stopped between them. And it was like, now what? And apparently the car had to ask permission from Zoox mission control or whatever. Can I back up? Which it did. Went to another lane, and then we proceeded just fine.
So it's not completely autonomous. So it had to at times to check
It was
in.
autonomous up to that. Like there was no safety driver. There could have been because there's no controls. There are like touch screens where you can select your ambient music soundtrack. Punch in your destination, stop the ride if you need to. It was actually the one of the founders was in the car itself, so we got to quiz him along the way. And yeah, they're aiming to take this thing commercial. They're not nearly as far along as Waymo is. Like, no one is going to be paying for service just yet. It'll be at least a month or so before they start inviting some of, I guess, their fans to ride for free.
Are they targeting any specific cities to start?
So they're in Vegas right now. They've also done tests in either with this taxi or they have this specially equipped fleet of Toyota Highlanders, which have this rack of sensors on the roof. So those are in Austin, Miami, and Seattle, and San Francisco as well. And so they seem to be serious about it. The car itself was comfortable, and it's an easy ride. It is an attention getter. We're at the stoplight, and a guy in a Tesla sees us, busts out his phone to start getting video of us. And another one that this couple in a Jeep were like, "Oh yeah," and we're like giving a thumbs up, like that's how we roll. And they were going to roll down the window and talk to us, but you can't roll down the window in a Zoox.
Right.
Well, that sounds like an amazing experience. And the fact that they're in Vegas, where I live now, I got to check them out myself.
Oh, you should, yeah.
Yeah. But be aware too that being in these a few years ago, Navia was one of the first like this autonomous vehicle built specifically for being autonomous, and we were doing a ride down the strip, and they were like one of the first ones, and everything went fine, and they were shuttling a bunch of us along, and then I came back from CES, and the next day there was a newspaper story in the local paper about how they were involved in the first accident. So somebody backed into them, so it wasn't the autonomous vehicle. But and you need that teleoperations thing. To Rob's point, is most of these they have to have a way of communicating back to headquarters. They're going to be, so those teleoperations are sort of, they'll have to be done to them. So they're still autonomous. It's just, in an emergency, that's they get called back.
Well, to Rob's point, since I've now been in Vegas for about 6 months, Vegas is a city that will never be in their finally constructed, and especially in that particular area where 15 is. I mean, it's a labyrinth of cones and closed off exits, and one day it's going to be really cool, that area, but right now it's pretty much very much under construction. So I got to check it out. Let's get to, though, before we wrap the podcast up, Stuart, I got to get your opinion on all this stuff. You've got
Oh, yeah.
TikTok and it's in its final days. There's a Supreme Court ruling that will probably happen either today or tomorrow. I suspect you never know based on the hearing itself how it's going to go, but I suspect the Supreme Court's going to let that law go through. And John, I know you've been spending a lot of time down in Mar-a-Lago with Elon Musk, whether he's going to really buy TikTok, which is now the rumor. But actually, let me start with Stuart. So, what are your thoughts on the TikTok piece, and then we'll kind of migrate into the made in chips component with TSMC and Apple.
Well, the first thing is I have to say that my wife is far more informed on this topic than I am. And everything I know about this is because she shows me, because I am not in social media. She does it as a profession. So this is all, a lot of my knowledge of this is coming from her. There, over the last few days, because of the potential ban, there has been this migration of TikTok users that are now called TikTok refugees over to a site, a Chinese government owned version of TikTok called Red Note. And so it's sort of like going from the fat to the fire in as far as the U.S. government is concerned, because if the government was concerned about security and Chinese interference on TikTok, that's enlarged geometrically on Red Note, which is actually operated by the Chinese government. In fact, my wife told me either last night or this morning that apparently China has shut down a lot of the foreign servers because a lot of the foreigners who are coming in are, I wouldn't say polluting the platform, but it's making it difficult for the Chinese to monitor exactly what's going on there. I've also seen a lot of things about TikTok users being very upset at all of this, and at the fact that they're going to be banned and they don't mind giving their data over to the Chinese. And to me, all of this seems like children protesting to their parents for not allowing them to get into cars when strangers offer them candy. I think a lot of TikTok users, I think a lot of TikTok users simply do not know what TikTok or the Chinese or ByteDance or anybody is doing behind the scenes with this data. Number one. Number two, the U.S. government has done a terrible job at letting TikTok users know why there is potential danger there and what the danger to the national security is. I have not heard word one other than testimony, that filters through from the Supreme Court hearings. It's exactly why TikTok is dangerous to national security. And I wish somebody in the federal government, whether it's on the left or the right, to explain why TikTok poses the danger that they all seem to be afraid of. Because all we're hearing is the complaints from TikTok users that the government is censoring them or taking away their freedom of speech or their ability to see cat videos or create dance videos. So I think there's a lot of misinformation floating around, primarily because the government has not made its case to the people in strong enough or clear enough terms. So it's a very odd situation. Trump has made a complete 180 on this, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that even if the Supreme Court rules for the ban, that Trump, as soon as he gets into the office, can simply reverse it by executive order. I might be wrong about that. I'm not entirely sure. So even if the court upholds the ban, at noon 12:01 a.m., right after he delivers the inaugural address on Monday, he could overturn that and say everything is fine and we're going to continue as it was. So all of this is going to be really up in the air for quite some time. Now, as to the Elon Musk buying TikTok, Mark Cuban yesterday posted a video on TikTok because a lot of people were calling on him to buy TikTok. And he said, I don't want TikTok. But if somebody comes up with a viable idea to use the technology behind Blue Sky to create a TikTok alternative, he's interested, and to leave him comments in the messages from that video.
Wow.
That's kind of the Project Liberty idea that guy used to own the Dodgers has been proposing, to buy TikTok without the algorithm and make it the sort of open source distributed thing. He says, the name will come to me in a second. He says he's got the money. But as far as what can happen, like it's a law. The president can't say this is null and void. He can say, "Oh, there's progress, so I'll give you 90 more days to figure it out."
Right.
I myself have been spending a lot of time on TikTok, and I think we really should pay more attention to Chinese culture and what we have to learn here. And all this opposition, as Chairman Mao wrote, all reactionaries are paper tigers.
But,
And,
but,
you know,
but guys,
all things here.
but guys, what's interesting though, and I want to just go back to what Stuart said. I do agree with the fact that the U.S. government has not done a good job of articulating why TikTok threatens America. I got it. However, having said that, it's not so much misinformation, but lack of information, meaning that that law passed under a bipartisan matter. It wasn't a Republican or Democrat only initiative.
Right.
And if you listen to some of the interviews that were done after the law was passed, they're all, under, in closed door sessions, there's reasons we can't disclose yet.
Right.
And which is always I know that people throw their arms out. Yeah. So you're telling me there's a reason, but you're telling me you can't tell me the reason. But on the flip side, though, I think TikTok has done a really poor job from a messaging standpoint because they've been running these ads lately. I don't know if you've seen them, where they're showing, "Oh, I'm a company here in Arkansas, and before TikTok came along, I didn't have a website, and now I have a viable business as I'm making money."
Yeah.
And that's all well and good, but it was like one example. I mean, I know there are more than one example, but I don't think TikTok's done a great job of trying to rehabilitate their reputation. That's all I'm saying from a marketing standpoint.
So I'll give you one reason why you might be worried about TikTok. So at the present time, as we are here online, the Chinese government has hacked into the telecommunications infrastructure of the United
Yes.
States, and we can't get them out. Like normally, when you have a breach like that, you can pretty much quickly update your Apache servers or make some changes in the basic back end. But for some reason, they haven't been able to extricate the hackers out of the system. And also, when you have a system like TikTok or applications like that are running on all these telecom, you get data and information about those systems as well, which helps. So there are a lot of reasons to think this might not be a good idea, right? To have such a massive thing with
Right.
these open back doors being used by hundreds of millions of people. And also, I don't buy the idea. Like, if you wanted to get off of Facebook or Meta, that's a problem, right? And a lot of people are talking about that now. How do I extricate myself from Facebook? But TikTok, there's no equity in TikTok. Nothing is stored or kept there, and your videos can be somewhere else, and your 2 million followers can move somewhere else tomorrow. There's really nothing that's holding you there. So I bet this goes through. I assume it will go through. I don't know what who will do on a whim, like tweeting from the bathroom. I don't know, or Elon Musk could turn around and try and buy it. That may happen, but really, there's no reason why people can't switch tomorrow. I know, people panicked a little bit, but it's not such a big deal, I don't think.
No,
The other thing I want to point out here is John and I have spent time in China together. We were actually followed around by what John thought was a spy. For somebody from the government actually watching us, and we both thought that was very funny. But when we got to Beijing, we couldn't get anything. We couldn't get Google. We couldn't get the New York Times. There is a huge degree of censorship in China.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Surprise, Stuart.
Yeah.
Well, we found the Chinese people wonderful, John. Right?
Yeah.
We had a great time, but the government is ultra paranoid.
Yeah.
And so it's what I think what I'm afraid of, or what a lot of people of, aside from what the government isn't telling us about what they can tell us, is what we don't know.
Yeah.
And the problem is that most users out there want a simplistic yes or no answer. Oh, Zuckerberg is bribing Congress into removing a competitor. I'm afraid of what we don't know and what we can't admit we don't know that might be going on that we cannot see.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, we could talk about this forever. The thing that I'm frustrated with, and I have spent lots of time in China, with prior organizations, and I was always warned, when you go over there, you never text anything unless you're okay with other people, air quotes, seeing that information. VPNs are VPNs are a way of life over there to use certain applications. I think the four of us know that. But I think the difference between the cultures here is that if you look at what happened with World War II, when we declared war on, well, we didn't declare war on Germany until they declared war on us, and same thing, obviously that was true of Japan.
When the Germans
The
bombed
U.S. government did not order Ford Motor Company and many private sector companies to enlist in the war effort. It was a very mutual type of thing. And in the event of, God forbid, some type of conflict between the United States and China, a Chinese company has no way to ignore what the government tells them to do.
Right.
That's the problem. That's where the problem is. Even if a Chinese company that even has an American presence that says, you know what, we're not going to do what you're asking us to do, they have no choice. That's the problem. And especially the thing that you just mentioned, John, that scares the bejesus out of me is that the type of attacks that we're seeing are attacks that leave it code that's buried deep that we can't detect, that may go into action. God forbid there's some type of conflict between our two countries. That's the scary stuff. That's what's so scary about all of this.
And
So-
it's that access to intellectual property and data. And Tesla is a significant presence in China. Some other companies have chosen not to be in China for reasons like that, because they want access to that data. Should Tesla be there? Maybe not,
Maybe not.
depends. So it's a choice that people are making, constantly juggling with. And yeah, I'm definitely concerned about the telecommunications infrastructure. It seems like the first thing that comes to mind. On the other hand, it's unfortunate because Stuart and I and the rest of us can attest, the Chinese have some great products, and we would love to see them everywhere. And that should be, a free flow of technology for people to use. But we're in this situation.
Let's. We only have a few minutes left here, but I don't want to ignore the Apple TSMC issue, because it actually it goes to this discussion as well. The fact that Apple now is getting to the final stages to build their silicon, with their which is the latest and greatest. If you kind of benchmark some of the technology that's out there, and it's a proof point. TSMC not being an American company, they're a Taiwanese company. Which, by the way, is an important distinction. They're not a Chinese company. I want to be very, very careful about that.
Right.
But nevertheless, I mean, they're not an American company. They're a Taiwanese company. From your estimate, Stuart, why do you think this is so important? Because
Well, there's a lot of trend going on that relates to this whole Chinese issue, that a lot of countries, India being the most prominent, are beginning to put in place local production laws that aren't allowing products to be sold within that country unless X% of that product is produced in that country. So, for instance, in Indonesia, Apple iPhone sales are banned now because not enough of Apple's iPhones are made or produced or parts made in Indonesia. And Apple has already, I think, said like a 1.6 billion investment in Indonesian manufacturing, and the Indonesians are saying no, not good enough.
Yeah.
In India, Apple is now, I think their target is to reach about 25% exported product, especially iPhones, from India by the end of this year. So you're seeing a lot of other countries with at least some pull going to these companies and saying, we're not going to allow you to sell product here unless you make product here. Now, obviously, the incoming administration is all about made in USA, which is a really tricky subject because there is nothing, even cars are US made cars aren't. Only a small percentage of US made cars are actually made in the US. And so I think the CHIPS Act and the fact that Apple is about to bring, or TSMC is about to bring this plant online, sort of hews to Apple's recognition and probably everybody else's, that they're going to need to make local investments if they're going to keep a globalization of their product. Now, of course, on the other side of the coin is Obviously, the incoming administration doesn't like anything the outgoing administration did. And there have been all sorts of stories about what the new administration will do with the CHIPS Act, either rescind it or simply stop funding it and providing whatever the tax dollars are. There's a huge argument over whether or not the tax breaks that are written into the CHIPS Act are actually beneficial or not, whether or not the company should be made to pay. There's a whole issue going on behind all of this. But there is a whole made here, sold here trend that is happening and is beginning to take hold in a lot of places around the world, including here.
Yeah.
Rob, your 2 cents?
Yeah, it is important. They talk about deleveraging and de-risking, and yeah, especially with Taiwan. If China is going to go to war with any country, it will unfortunately be Taiwan, and hopefully it won't, because we got enough problems.
It would be bad.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and so I would add that any notion of repealing the Chips and Science Act would be insane, absolutely stupid, especially if you're keen on economic nationalism. You want people to make stuff here. Don't undo the act that has provided them with a lot of.
No, and we've talked about this before. I mean, the company that no one wants to mention now is Intel.
Yeah.
Intel is depending on these dollars to build these foundries. The problem I have that I struggle with is that Intel's investment in their foundry business has not been a very economically profitable one so far. They're just not. They're not. It's not to say that another company like TSMC couldn't do a better job, because they are that's their business. They're in the foundry business. So what I struggle with, because I think we all agree that there's a national security issue here. That do we really want chips made in a non-U.S. factory showing up in an F-14? I think we all agree the answer is probably no. The problem is that it runs counter to the fact that Intel is the better alternative, but from a business standpoint, they're not doing a great job at building chips. And to be very honest with you, the job on the designing side has been just a little bit better, a tad better, but not as good as it should be. So anyway, that's my perspective on that. Guys, we're going to have to actually, John, let me give you the final word, and then we're going to kind of wrap it up.
Oh, about this? Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. I want to say it's like 15 years ago, something like that. We kind of warned people about this issue when Global Foundry was rising in prominence, and Intel basically said, we don't want to make chips anymore. We're just going to be, they recognized that it was kind of business wasn't really as profitable, as you point out, as anybody would like to be. And they really wanted out of the fab business. And they had the technology that they could sell and make other people make the chips. It all made sense. And now suddenly we've reversed course after all of that. And it's not a heavy industry typically. There's lower environmental impact. So, yeah, it would be a good thing to have more fab plants here. And hopefully, as everybody else, in this program has suggested, that keeps going, and we encourage that. We just don't have many businesses that were making their own chips. So trying to encourage that here is a good thing, I think.
Well, maybe next time you'll hear about Donald Trump asking to build a foundry near the Panama Canal. Maybe that'll be the next.
In Greenland. We want to have Greenland.
There's certainly not a land in Greenland. Guys, let's we'll just wrap it up here. But thanks again for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the SmartTechCheck podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and the subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these convenient on-screen QR codes to connect with me. You can also follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And until next time, have a great week. And guys, thanks again for joining.
Take care.
Welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.